So I want to welcome you today, everyone, to ConsimWorld, our second webinar. Today's webinar topic matter is the Navajo Wars and the First Nations series by GMT Games. Tonight we are privileged to have the designer, Joel Toppen, will be presenting today on Navajo Wars and the First Nations series. And we're also pleased to have the game developer joining us this evening. Mike Bertucelli will be joining us as well. So without further ado, I'm going to be now introducing and turning things over to Joel Toppen. Thank you.
Alrighty, hey everybody, thank you for joining tonight. I imagine that several people may have already seen the YouTube videos that we put out earlier this year on Navajo Wars. And what I wanted to do tonight in the webinar here is talk a little bit more about the First Nations series that's kind of come out of the Navajo Wars design, and talk a little bit about the design, share some things that we did not share in the YouTube videos. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about was the origin of the game. And here's a little snapshot of portion of the map that we're using right now. This is all playtest concept art. We haven't been in talks with any final artists yet, but this is just an idea of what we want to see in the final art. But the game actually is an outcome of reading a book. And it actually goes back a little bit further back, let's say about the year 2006. I acquired a game many of you may be familiar with, Geronimo by Richard Berg. And somehow I ended up with 2 copies of the game. And one of my gaming buddies, who was, he just graduated from high school, Navajo kid, and he ended up getting my second copy. And we had a little talk about the game. I was hoping to get a chance to play it with him. We never actually got a chance to play Geronimo, but it was in talking with him afterwards, he basically informed me that to the Navajo, Kit Carson is not a famous Indian fighter. He's more like the devil. And I was curious about that, and I lived in the American Southwest for over 10 years, actually longer than that, 15 years, and I didn't know a whole lot about this particular region's history. I grew up in the Dakotas, and so I knew more about the Sioux Indians than I did about Navajo that I'd lived among for 15 years. And so he recommended I look into this, and so I ended up buying a book called Blood and Thunder, and actually that was a serious contender for the title of the game, except that there was a game entitled Blood and Thunder by, I think it was GDW, I think it's a Chadwick game, and on a completely different topic, and I didn't want to have any confusion there, so that's why we went with something different. But in this book, it talks about the history of Kit Carson and also about the Navajo. And throughout this, as I'm reading the book, it just ideas begin to pop in my head about how this could be a really interesting game. But I wanted to tell the story. When I finished reading the book, I was like, man, this is an amazing story here, and I've lived in the center of it for a long time and really didn't know the details. So what I began to do is drop some ideas for what I wanted to see in the game, and the very first thing I wanted to do was to make it a solitaire game. And the reason for that was very simple. The reason for that was I knew that none of my Navajo buddies would want to play against the Navajo. They're very, very proud of their history and heritage, and so I wanted to tell the story from the Navajo perspective. So that's where this game was birthed out of. The game's come through several different iterations before it, reached its present form. But that's where the game came from. If you look at the map here, it may look almost like one of the solitaire games that Victory Point Games has been producing. They have the States of Siege series, and the map may look like it's a derivative of that, and in some ways it is, but there's far, far more going on in this game than that. The game is basically based around a couple different premises, and one of the central premises of the game that has never changed is the idea that the natives are able to travel from area to area much faster, much smoother than the enemy. The enemy is confined to moving along pre-fashioned paths, and those paths are representations or an abstraction of the very rugged terrain that you find here in the American Southwest. There'll be patches of open prairie, and then all of a sudden you're in canyon lands and very rough terrain. And so we were able to abstract that using these raid paths of interconnected boxes. But the Navajo can jump from area to area much more fluidly than the enemy can. So if you look at the game, it does share some heritage with the States of Siege series, but it is there's a lot more going on here. The development of the game has gone through a number of different stages. I want to show you a little bit here that we did not show in the YouTube videos. But as you see here, we have a sample snapshot of one of the areas in the game, the Shiprock area. The map's divided into 6 areas that are named after certain landmarks in that particular region. I think that if I were to put my hometown of Gallup on the map, I think we'd be around box 3 of the Zuni Mountains area. But this is the Shiprock area that we're portraying here, and each area has 6 interconnected boxes that number from 1 to 6, and that's actually the number of movement points it costs to enter that box. And it costs more to enter the deeper boxes because that's representing going deeper into canyonlands or much more rugged terrain that's less accessible, especially to the colonial powers. Each area's got a die roll face on it, and that's used for random selection when you have to randomly select an area. It's very easy. You just roll a die, look at the map. There is a central area on the map that's called Canyon de Chelly. It looks like Canyon de Chelly, but it's pronounced Canyon de Chelly, and that's a special area. It's a safe refuge area, but you have to be careful about it because historically it was their refuge, but on 2 occasions it became a death trap. And the final showdown between Kit Carson and the Navajo took place in Canyon de Chelly. So we were able to portray that as just a special area, so it doesn't have a die roll face. It's not subject to drought, that sort of thing. Each area has 2 drought boxes on it that it's a way to show the ebb and flow of the American Southwest becoming more and more desert over the 300-year history that the game portrays. Beneath that, you'll see that we got some cards out here. A lot of these cards we've shown before in different presentations, but one thing we're doing different here, the game consists basically of 3 different types of cards. Operations cards that you see on the right, that's the heart of the game. That's what drives the game, and there's a lot that happens on a particular card. The center card that you see there is one of the representatives of the historic cards in the game. The game's divided into 3 periods: the Spanish period, the Mexican period, and the American period. And the periods are named after which colonial power controlled New Mexico. So the Spanish controlled up to, I think, 1821. Then you got the Mexican in control until 1846 during the Mexican War. In fact, there's a very interesting story behind the Mexican War. The Navajo actually played a pretty important role in the passage of Phil Kearny's army into New Mexico. If the Navajo had not been raiding the heck out of New Mexico at the same time, it's more likely that the Mexicans in New Mexico would have put up a much more stout resistance to Kearny's army and not have surrendered so quickly as they did. That might have made a lot of difference when Phil Kearny showed up in California in a very weakened state. He probably would have never made it to California had the New Mexicans actually fought. But that's all kind of represented in the game through these historic cards. Each period has 4 different historic cards that come up, and they're basically landmarks in the course of the game. They're historical signposts that mark the passage of time. And the passage of time is abstracted in the game. We have very cool things that you don't really read about or hear about in other games. And then we also have cards, historic cards that are very familiar, like you see here. We have the American Civil War portrayed here, and it has an effect on the game. The American Civil War broke out. Basically, New Mexico emptied of troops. A bunch of them go to the north, a bunch of them go to the south, and the Mescalero Apache, Hickory Apache, Navajo a lot of these southwestern tribes decided that would be a great opportunity to reassert their independence. And so that's actually portrayed inside the game here. Now, something we're doing very recently. In fact, we really can't even show you on Vassal yet what we're doing. We're still working out some of the details, but one of the concerns, the development is gone along really, really well. The game is very tightly balanced at present, and we're very happy with how things are coming along. But there is one nagging issue that's just been driving me nuts, and that is that the game still felt, to me, to be a little bit too long. And so we're trying to figure out how can we preserve the richness of the game experience and the culture and the history that you get inside the game and the tension of the game. How do we compact that into a smaller amount of time to play it? Because as it was taking about 2 hours for an experienced player to play through one of the 3 periods. And that's how we've broken up the scenario. So obviously if you're playing the full campaign, it could take at least 6 hours to play, assuming that you do well. If you do lousy, you might lose earlier than that. But we're trying to figure out how we do this, and so we've come up with an idea, and we've taken 1/3 of the cards, removed them from the deck, and inserted in their place new ceremony cards. Navajo have 2 very important ceremonies in their religion, and one of them is the blessing way, and the other is the enemy way. And so what we've done is we've inserted these ceremony cards, and so each card has a blessing way, each card has an enemy way ceremony, and whenever you draw one of these cards, you conduct the instructions that are written on them. The instruction, the first step of it is that you take if you have any ceremony card in your hand, then you trigger its enemy way effect, which is going to be something bad. And then the next thing you do is each ceremony card has a population symbol, which represents one of the different age groups of your tribe's population, and you go ahead and put that one into play. So basically you can increase the size of your tribe's population with one of these cards, which is a very cool benefit. Then the next thing you do with this thing is you put the ceremony card into your hand. Now, what does the ceremony card do in your hand? Well, there's a blessing way effect on here. And what that is during whenever you're involved in a battle or you're involved in evading from an enemy, you got to make a crucial die roll. And we all know how those things go. It seems to be the more crucial it is, the more likely it is you're going to whiff on it. So what we've done is we've added die roll faces to these 12 ceremony cards. And there's going to be 3 of each face, 3 of each population symbol, and so forth. Well, if you got one of these blessing way cards in your hand, ceremony cards in your hand, you can discard it for its blessing way effect whenever you're in a battle or an evasion situation. And whenever you're in a battle, you want to roll high and you want your enemy to roll low. So the 1s and 6s tend to be the ones that you really want to use for battle, especially if you're trying to set up an ambush, because ambushes can really hurt the enemy and reinforce your military position. So you got these things in your hand, but you want to wait for the perfect opportunity to use it, but there's some tension involved, because if you draw another ceremony card, you're not only going to lose the one that you've been holding, but it's going to trigger its negative enemy way effect, which is going to be something that's going to hurt you. So that's adding some new wrinkles of tension in the game. It's also it's providing some more historic and cultural flavor to the game. So that's just a little bit about Navajo Wars, and here's some more pictures of some of the cards. There's culture cards in the game that you see on the left. They're like technologies. We call them techs for short, but they're really called cultural development cards. You can acquire these things during gameplay. You will never be able to acquire all of the cards that the game provides. The game is going to provide a bunch of these things. They come in 8 different suits or sets of 3 levels each. And before each game starts, 3 of those suits or sets of cards are going to be removed from the game, and so you have to work with whatever's left over. Most of these are very historic, and the Navajo historically adopted a certain measure of these different cultural development cards. Some of them are completely ahistorical. For example, Way of the Warrior that you see pictured here in the center left. That's something that the Navajo did not adopt. They did not develop an extensive warrior society like you see in the Comanche tribe. But what if they did? So we've provided an option in here. If you want to take a much more warlike stance, you certainly have the option to do so, but you have to play very differently than how you would play otherwise. On the right-hand side, there are 3 cards that mark the end of a given period. So there's only going to be one of these in the deck at any time. When you're playing the Mexican or the Spanish period, you put Mexican independence in the deck, and it's going to be one of the 10 bottom cards. It's going to be one of the 9 bottom cards of the deck, and you don't know which one it's going to be. And when it's drawn, it ends the scenario. And if you're playing the campaign, it basically forms an effect that will be in play for the duration of the Mexican period. And when the Mexican period begins, you put Army of the West in the deck, bottom 9 cards. It's going to be one of those. And what that does is that triggers the end of the Mexican period and introduces the beginning of the American period. And the final one is Kit Carson, who the Navajo call the rope thrower. And I've got some great Navajo-speaking friends that are getting me all the Navajo pronunciation spelling for these names. So we're going to have some very cool historic notes in the playbook. But the Kit Carson card, when that comes up, it triggers a massive last-ditch raid by the enemy. It's a portrayal of the cataclysmic event that ended the Navajo's freedom. And so in this, if you're playing the campaign, everything you've done is leading up to that point, and hopefully you've prepared well enough to be able to fend that last raid off. And that basically would end the campaign game or the American period. So, and also we've provided some short scenarios in the game that can be played in an hour or less. And one of those is the last phase. It's one of my favorite scenarios. It's the last phase of the American period where everything's leading up to the showdown with Kit Carson. And it's a real tough scenario. It's not recommended for the new players. You really you got to be able to squeeze everything you can out of your tribe and out of everything you know about the game in order to win it. So we've also provided a short new player scenario, tutorial scenario that kicks things off at a little bit more leisurely pace. During the Spanish period, the Navajo historically grew to become very powerful, and the Spanish really couldn't figure out how to fight these guys. And so we've provided a early scenario, a short scenario for the new players to be able to get a feel for the game, and it's not as difficult as some of the other scenarios are. So that's where we are with the game. Again, we designed it as a solitaire game, and mainly that was because I wanted to tell the story from the Navajo perspective. But about 6 months into the serious development of the process of the game, I came up with an idea, and I just threw it out to Mike, our developer, who I'm going to hand things over to here in just a second. I just pitched this idea out there. So what about a 2-player game where you're playing cooperatively, but only to a degree? What if it was semi-cooperative, where if one of you can win the game, but both of you could lose the game? And so I pitched the idea to him. I liked it. We tried it out, and by golly, I think it's more fun than the solitaire game is, and I really enjoy the solitaire game. So Mike's going to talk to you for a few minutes here about the 2-player game.
Hey everybody, thanks Joel. Yeah, the 2-player game, like Joel said, it's really fun. I kind of hate to say it, but it may be more fun than the solitaire game. The good thing about it is it really doesn't change any of the rules for the solitaire game, so everything stays intact. The game was designed as a solitaire game and then developed into a 2-player game, which is a lot different than a lot of the ways that solitaire games work. But as you said, it's semi-cooperative, so basically what you're going to be doing is you're playing the game together, and you're both will be taking the role of the headman of the tribe, which is basically like the chief. So the Navajos call the headman. And one of you will be the headman at a time, and as you'll be playing the game, the decisions that you have to make will, as the headman player, you're kind of in charge of doing things. And if you do something good for the tribe, then it's going to help you get victory points. So what we've done is we've made the two-player game have a victory point track, and so what you're trying to do is get, of course, more victory points than your opponent. But what happens in the game is it has a really unique dynamic that puts you in conflict a lot of the times. Since you're playing cooperative, you need to beat the game system, and that's not easy to do when you're just playing by yourself. But now that you have this whole two-player system, a lot of times what's good for you is not good for the tribe. So you have a decision to make. Do I play selfishly and try to do something that's going to help me get more victory points, be the better headman player, or do I do what's best for the tribe so we don't lose as a whole? It makes for some very interesting dynamics in the game. One of the things that we do, there are families that will be on the game board, and as the player, the headman player and the non-headman player will be in charge of some of these families that are on the board. So if I'm the headman player and I'm doing something with my opponent's family and it goes wrong, it's going to hurt me. So it's very interesting how that all works. And then what also happens in the game is the headman player will change, and it can change quite a bit. If I'm the headman player and the way that the cards come up, my opponent chooses what we're going to do, and he decides to do a passage of time, well, that headman status is going to change, and he's going to become the headman. So there are ways to be in charge of the game. There are ways to manipulate the families. It's just a really interesting concept that a whole lot of war games, don't have at this time. One of the other neat kind of things in the game too is that it's almost self-balancing, because since it's semi-cooperative, and if you lose the game, you both lose. If I get way out ahead of my opponent, he just may say, you know what, I'm just going to try to throw this thing. I'm not going to let him just run away with this. You never want to get too far ahead of your opponent. So it kind of self-balances that way. I find most time when we play the game that we don't have that problem. It's always really close because we're just trying to hang on to win the thing. And if I can do good enough to win as the solitaire, as a semi-cooperative, then that's great. But it's not easy. Has some very unique, different concepts. You guys can go and check that out. Like Joel was saying, we've done a lot of it on YouTube already. We've done some of the two-player game, and we're planning on continuing that here fairly soon. So I'll throw it back to you, Joel.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. One thing I could add to what Mike said is operations cards. They're the heart of the game. Most of the cards in the deck are of the operation card variety. I want to say there's 28 of those in the deck. And what happens is when one comes up, you always have the opportunity to either preempt the enemy and go first, or the enemy goes first and you go second on that card. The trouble with preemption is it's expensive. It costs you some resources that we call action points. And there's going to be times where you just can't afford to preempt. Preemption has a benefit in that, if you went last on the previous card, you could get a back-to-back play, but you can never sustain that indefinitely, so eventually the enemy is going to get back-to-back plays on you. Well, in the two-player game, the cool thing is that the headman player will decide whether or not we're going to preempt. Are we going to preempt the enemy or not? And if he preempts the enemy, then he gets to decide. How is it, Mike? If we preempt the enemy, he decides what to do, and the non-headman player executes it, right? Or is it the other way around?
I'm sorry, Joel. Could you ask that question one more time, please?
Okay, with the preemption rule, I don't have the notes in front of me, but when the headman player decides whether or not to preempt, and if he decides to preempt, then the non-headman player gets to carry out the action, right? Do you remember how that works?
Yeah, he'll get to carry out the action. Well, he will say what they're going to do. So he'll say we're either going to do actions, or we're going to do a planning operation, or we're going to do a passage of time, and then it goes back to the other player, and he actually performs whatever the other player decides they're going to do. So there's a back and forth thing there in either way, and it's just the opposite if you don't preempt. So for the first player, the non-headman player will decide we're going to do this action, then the headman player will actually carry that action out. So you got to be careful what you want to do, because you may say, you know, we need to do this, so I'm going to choose this action. But it's up to the player. He could just say, you know what, that sounds great when we did our negotiations, but I'm doing it this way, so it benefits me more. So that's the real back and forth. There's a little bit of diplomacy meets pandemic a little bit. A little playing together, but you know, you can negotiate things out, but the player who actually performs whatever action the other player wants to do, he performs it the way he wants to do it. So it does make for a very interesting dynamic.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, that's exactly. I kind of joke about how I just write the rules. I don't remember them. But Mike's been in charge of doing our two-player stuff, and he's done a great job of honing those into something that's a lot of fun to play. And we've played about, I want to say we played about half of a game online. We are going to continue it, but with the new rules that we've been inserting, I want to try out the two-player game, and we'll do a live demo of it sometime here in the near future, where we're incorporating the new ceremony cards. But two-player, it's a lot of fun to play. So some people might not be into solitaire games, and one of the things I wanted to ask as a poll question, so I don't know if John can put this up here, was what your level of interest is in solitaire games. Is that something you're really interested in or less interested in, that sort of thing? Because we're working on building this series, and I just wanted to get some feedback on that. So if John can put that poll question up.
Great. Thanks, Joel. So hopefully you see the question posted now. So I'd like everybody, if you could take a moment to look at the question. How would you rate your interest in solitaire games? You can select one of these, high, moderate, or low. And what I'll do is I'll hold for a few moments. I see results coming in. I'll wait a few more seconds, and I will post the results once they are done. So again, we have about 60% of the vote in. I will hold just a little bit longer. If you could go ahead and answer that poll question, and I will then close it out and share the results. So give it a few more seconds. We're now at 70%. Maybe one or two more of you haven't voted yet, and I'll see if I can get you to do it in the next 10 seconds. Thank you.
All righty.
All right.
Appreciate the
I'm going to go ahead and close.
John.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share the poll now. And so as you can see here, I've gone ahead and closed it. We had about 80% who are attending the webinar have responded. So thank you again for responding to the question. And as you can see here, Joel, looks quite strong here with, well, actually 88%, nearly 90% are high or moderate. So it looks very favorable.
Excellent. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I was kind of thinking as I began to design Navajo Wars, is I'm thinking I really enjoy solitaire games myself. I play Silent War a lot. I enjoy playing Fields of Fire. I enjoy playing the States of Siege games. I play the heck out of those States of Siege games, and those are great because I can pack them in my suitcase whenever I'm on a trip or something. But I also ran into some people that said, yeah, but I don't really I play games because of the social experience. And so the two-player game also provides that. And, of course, you can always play a solitaire game cooperatively. But I find it a lot of fun to play the semi-cooperative because it almost models things better, because there was never any centralized, unified leadership in any of the North American tribes at any time, and the Navajo tribe was no exception. And, in fact, they were more divided than any of the other tribes, and that was what contributed a lot to the misunderstandings between the colonial powers, especially the Americans and the Navajo. The Americans always insisted on a central spokesman to speak for the whole tribe, and that was a completely foreign concept to the Navajo. There was lots of independent bands that were led by a headman or a respected elder who could be male or female, which was also very unusual for some of the North American tribes. And so in the two-player game, you have the opportunity to do what's best for you, but that might not be what's best for the tribe. And so that tension actually is almost more historically accurate than what we've modeled in the solitaire game. So I wanted to have the best of both worlds there. And so I appreciate the feedback on there. One of the things I want to do next, let's see, I've got to change, hold on a second here. Lost focus, there we go. Want to go on to the next slide here and talk a little bit about the First Nations series. As I said before, I wanted to tell the story of these different tribes from the native perspective. And how do I do that? I want to basically use the medium of a war game to tell the story. And after I designed Navajo Wars and GMT picked up the game, put it on P500, I began to get ideas for another game using another tribe, because I had to do a lot of research into the Navajo, and when I was running across that research, and by the way, the title Navajo Wars is basically, I borrowed it from a book on the topic. The book is called Navajo Wars, or The Navajo Wars. And that's basically, it's a very dry but very thorough account of the game period that we're modeling here. But I also had to do some research into the Comanche tribe, a little bit into the Ute, which were the traditional enemies of the Navajo. And as I began to study those, I began to find a real fascination with the Comanches. So I started to kind of noodle around with a game on the Comanche. And that's when I pitched the idea to GMT, hey, how about if we take this into a series? The only problem is I don't see us having a series rule book. And the reason for that is simple. The Comanche are the polar opposite of the Navajo, and so many different levels, that in order to make the game model the Comanche tribe, we're going to have to depart from some things that we were using with the Navajo game. So what I want to do is I want each game to have a similar feel. And I want that, when you slide from one game to the next, they're going to have different rules, but they're going to have a similar feel to them. I also want to try to focus on a particular tribe or tribal group, but I'm not holding to that tenaciously. And I know that we had a poll question on that I gave to John here. What would you prefer to see here? So if we could put that poll question up, what was the next one, John?
Sure, I'll go ahead and let me launch that poll question now. I believe this is the question you're looking for. So the question is, which of one of these tribes would you like to see most in a First Nations series game? So we're looking for your preference out of these three if you have one. So we'll leave this poll question open for a second, and we'll give everybody a chance to go ahead and make a selection. So we've got nearly 50% of the vote in. I'll go ahead and keep the poll open to give everybody a chance to decide what they would most like to see in a First Nation series game for the tribe.
And I should point out that we don't have Comanche on there because that is game 2. I'm at a fairly advanced stage of the design on that. But I'm already thinking about game 3.
Well, that's a good point. Good thing you mentioned that since that's not on the list. So I'll wait about 5 more seconds if anybody wants to get in their selections here, and then I'll go ahead and close and share the results. So I'll go ahead and do that now. So thank you again for doing that. And here you can see the results, Joel.
Very interesting. It's funny that the Iroquois should show up on the top there. I'm kind of partial a little bit to the Sioux myself because I grew up in the Dakotas. I used to live in Pierre, South Dakota, and I find the Sioux very, very fascinating. But at the same time, I've been doing some research on the Iroquois, and I've already got a great title for that game, and so I'm kind of leaning toward the Iroquois myself. So your feedback is greatly appreciated. We have another poll question that I'd like to ask at this time, and that has to do with what would you like to see in this series? Would you prefer to see tribe or tribal groups represented, like the Apache, Comanche, the Iroquois, or our tribal group? Or would you like to see some campaign games? Examples of that would be Red Cloud's War, the Powder River campaign, the Pueblo Revolt. I had to do a little bit of research into that because that dovetails in the Navajo Wars. And it's a fascinating campaign because they chased the Spanish out of New Mexico and Texas. And that's something that did not happen in the other colonial wars. The Pueblo Revolt is a lot like King Philip's War, except that the Pueblos won. And so, there is some opportunity for some of these other events. We could do something on the flight of Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce. So.
All right. Well, I'm going to leave this poll question open just a little bit longer. I'm going to wait another 20 or 30 seconds because we just got over half people attending having voted, and given the split I'm seeing, I would like to see something trend one way or the other compared to the other two choices here. So we've got about 70% of the vote in. Let's see in the last 15 seconds here we can get everybody else to cast a vote between these three choices, and then I will close down the poll and share the results. So we'll give it another 5 seconds. Last call for your votes. All righty, let me go ahead and close this poll and share the results with you, Joel, and here you go.
All right, some people like to see the campaigns. What I'm thinking with the tribe or tribal group is what we've done with the Navajo is you put the player in control of them and you try to maintain their independence for as long as possible. See if you can do better than the historic result. With campaigns, obviously, you're trying to model a campaign, and there's some fascinating campaigns. And I should say this about the campaigns. Let me change my screen here a second. Like I said here on the screen, I'd like to have a few games that would focus on a campaign during the Indian Wars. Some of these campaigns have gotten they've gotten across, I think, a lot of times to Westerners as though it was a real one-sided affair, and the Indians never had a chance, or Custer never had a chance in the Bighorn campaign, and that's actually not the case. A lot of these were very tight-run events. The Powder River campaign, if you know nothing about it, sometimes it's called Red Cloud's War, 1866 to 68, I want to say. The Sioux Indians won that campaign. The American Army was forced to withdraw from the territory along the Powder River and the Bozeman Trail. A couple forts were burned by the Sioux after the Americans evacuated, and were forced to come to terms on terms favorable to the Sioux. Now, of course, they later on reneged on those promises, but the campaign itself was actually a very interesting affair. You could also do Kit Carson's foray into Texas, where he went to chastise the Comanche, and if it were not for 2 mountain guns, it would have been Kit Carson's last stand, much like Custer's last stand. He grabbed the proverbial tiger by the tail and found himself tangling with over 2,000 Kiowa and Comanche warriors who were very, very skilled at warfare. In fact, the Comanche, they are a fascinating group of people. They made the Southern Plains untenable to their enemies. You could not fight them. The whites could not fight them on open terms on the open prairie. The best thing they could do to hope for was to try to pick them off at long range with buffalo rifles, but the Comanche were such skilled horsemen and such skilled archers that and mounted archers, I should say, that they made the Southern Plains untenable to their enemies. In fact, the six-shooter was invented. One of the reasons it was invented was to fight the Comanche on terms that would shift the balance of power, and the six-shooter did change the balance of power in the Southern Plains. So, there's lots of neat ground that we could cover in this series. And again, I want to try to tell the story from the tribe's perspective, but I think that could still be done in a campaign format. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at here. Before we close out tonight, I want to talk a little bit about the Comancheria game. And I want to first of all say that this is very much under construction. I've already built and destroyed 2 prototypes. Built my first prototype around the beginning of the year. Drew up a map, had counters, everything, pushed things around, and I didn't quite like it. But now I'm on to something that's working really, really how I want it to work. And so what we're doing right now is we're making Comancheria a card game. It's going to work a lot like Navajo Wars. There's going to be a lot of similarities in the feel, in the terminology that we use in the game, so players should be able to shift from one to the other pretty quickly. What I'm trying to do with Comancheria is I'm trying to make it a little bit less complex than Navajo Wars. I would rate Navajo Wars at moderately complex. I want to make this one a little bit lighter and a little bit faster playing. And I also want to make this, have the semi-co-op variant to it. And so we're experimenting with different ways to do that. I know some people wanted me to make Navajo Wars a 4-player game, and it's just not going to happen, at least not in the game that we're saying to print. There may be a way to expand that in a future expansion, but I'm not going to say anything officially about that just now. But with Comancheria, what we're doing is we're making it possibly up to 2 players. Actually, we are going to make it a 2-player semi-co-op, but we're focusing on the solitaire game. And that's what we did with Navajo Wars. We designed it with a solitaire game, and then we worked in the 2-player element. So what's going to happen here is we're going to use cards to model the vast swaths of open plains that the Comanche roamed in southern Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas. Kansas was about the northern part of their range, but they also ranged out into eastern New Mexico, the staked plains of Texas and New Mexico, the Llano Estacado, as it was called. It was called that because the explorer, I want to say it was Coronado, that as they marched out there, they found that they could not navigate on the open prairie. It was like being out in the ocean. And so they actually drove stakes in the ground to help themselves find their way back home. But the Comanche roamed this area, hunted buffalo. They dominated the area for a lengthy period of time. And so that's what we're going to try to model here, and we're using cards to do that. It allows us to do that, I think, in a very neat way. So that's just some samples of the playtest card I'm working with right now. In this game, what we're going to do here is the player is going to have to acquire and trade in resources. They're going to have different types of resources that are going to be tracked on a player aid. So, and right now I want to use cubes for that. I want to try to keep that feel to the game. So you got cubes to track how many horses you have, bison, slaves, and you're going to have to use your bison, horses, and slaves. And by bison, I mean bison products like dried meat. They would trade, obviously, in the buffalo robes. They were highly prized commodities on the frontier. But you have to trade in these things, and also the vast slave trade in the American West and Southwest in particular. A lot of people don't want to talk about that, but that was a central resource. And the Comanche were very much a trading people. In fact, they conquered their territory to advance their trade empire. And a very interesting people group. And what you have to do in the game is you have to acquire these things, and then you trade them to get other resources that you need to continue to keep your empire and to also expand it. And those resources are, of course, guns and additional warriors. So what would happen was the Comanche would acquire horses from the Pueblo tribes and also from the Spanish. The Spanish had a very strict policy for decades that they did not trade firearms to natives. And the reason for that was simple. They were vastly outnumbered, and they needed to keep their technological edge. That being said, there were still black marketers who would trade firearms to the natives, but that never happened on a very large scale. And so that's why in Navajo Wars, firearms are kind of hard to go by. With the Comanche, that's going to be less a problem. And the reason for that is simple. The Comanche would acquire slaves from the Lipan Apache and other tribes in the area that they were conquering, and they'd take those slaves to New Mexico and they would trade them to the Spanish. And the Spanish, of course, were obliged to rescue these slaves from the Comanche, so they would buy these slaves. Of course, they wouldn't free them. They basically were slaves to the Spanish or the Pueblo tribes. And in return for the slaves, the Comanche would acquire horses and also food. Now, why would they need food? They got all this bison. Well, it turns out the Comanche diet of living off of buffalo alone is not a terribly healthy diet. You need to have some carbohydrates, and so they would actually get corn from the Pueblo tribes to supplement their diet. And whenever they couldn't do that, they suffered some serious health issues. And as a consequence, their numbers would dwindle in those time periods when they could not get corn products from the tribes that planted and so forth. So you got to trade slaves for horses, for food, bison products for horses and food. And then what you do is you go over to the French. Now the French, they were all about money in North America and a trade empire. And they were willing to trade anything for the right price, and so Comanche would acquire their weapons from the French. But what's going to happen in the game is eventually these colonial powers will begin to attack one another. And so you will have these periphery global events like the 7 Years' War. In the wake of the 7 Years' War, the French lose their position in Louisiana, and the Spanish move in. Of course, the Spanish have this policy about no firearms. So now the Comanche have to find a new way to acquire firearms, and so some of this stuff is going to play into the game. So a lot of this is going to have to do with acquiring resources and being able to trade them with people groups. And you're going to have different types of enemies consisting of tribes like the Lipan Apache. They were the Plains Apache that were nearly exterminated by the Comanche. And the Comanche basically replaced them as lords of the Southern Plains. So you're going to have those in the game. There's going to be colonial enemies that are going to fight to subjugate other tribes, which could be a problem for the player because some of those tribes you don't want to subjugate because they are your source for weapons. Some of these smaller, weaker tribes, they had alliances with the French or with other groups that they could get guns from, and so the Comanche would form alliances with these weaker tribes because that was their outlet for firearms. You're also, as I say, going to have colonial enemies that are going to fight each other, and the player is going to try to influence the outcomes of those wars. See, the Comanche occupy this central location in between two powerful colonial enemies, but they were able to play one off the other and to their own advantage, and that's going to be something that's going to play into the game. Here's some sample artwork of what we're toying with here. You can see we've got some cards for the Lipan Apache, the Wichita tribes, the Pawnee, and the backs of these cards. So this is all just concept art that we're still toying with, and I haven't even showed Mike all of what we're working with here. But this is what is hopefully going to produce a prototype. I hope to have a prototype with me by the time of ConsimWorld Expo in June that I can show off. And of course, we're going to have Navajo Wars there as well. Comancheria is going to be a little different from Navajo Wars. It is going to use a deck of action cards that's going to drive all the random results, all the decision making in the game. That is going to be random. You're not going to need to make die rolls because the action deck's going to govern all that. In fact, the action deck is, I'm borrowing a lot of ideas here from two games that I greatly admire, and that is Fields of Fire and the game Combat Commander. So cards are going to have triggers on them. So whenever you do something, the strength of your warrior bands, the greater the strength, the more likely it is you will be successful. But the greater the strength, the more cards you're going to have to pull to determine whether or not you have success. But as you pull these cards, you might trigger an enemy action against you. So, in other words, the bigger the band, the more attention you might attract and the more danger you might run into, whereas if you're going with a smaller band, you might not be successful, but you're probably not going to attract any unwanted attention. So that's what we're working with here. We're still working on the deck and some of the things involved with the cards. The cards are going to be used in a lot of different ways, and that's basically what I have here to show you on the Comanche game. So I think we're just about finished here. I think I got through all the poll questions. I think we have maybe one more poll question on.
Yeah, are you
an intent to pre-order Navajo Wars?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and throw that up. And I know, are you done with the screen sharing then, Joel, as well?
Yeah, I think you can go ahead and take that back.
All right, great. So I'll be doing that here in a second. But first, we have our poll question, and again, it's just to check your present status and interest in Navajo Wars. Do you intend to pre-order Navajo Wars? You can select one of these. You've perhaps already pre-ordered the game, or you haven't, but you plan to. You would mark yes, or you do not plan to pre-order the game. You're going to wait until it's perhaps published first before you purchase, or you're undecided at this time. So we'll go ahead and keep the poll question open here for a little bit longer, and when we're done, we'll be sure to share the results. And while we're keeping the poll open, I'm going to go ahead and get screen sharing back here. And
let me just say this about the pre-order process. I know some people are, they're concerned. It looks like maybe it won't be produced for a little while. We've been doing very well on pre-orders. I think that if the closer you get to 700, the faster it's going to get produced. And I don't think it's unreasonable to see us get a fourth quarter slot this year or a first quarter slot for next year if the pre-orders keep coming in. I know some people have told me, well, I don't want to pre-order now because my credit card might be expired by the time it gets produced. That's really not a problem. GMT is real good about that. I know whenever I've had that problem, they were able to contact me and say, hey, your card's expired. Can we get new information? And it didn't mess up my pre-order at all. So, and I know some people say, well, I want to wait to pre-order until it gets closer to production, but that doesn't actually speed up the process. What speeds up the process is the more orders that come in, the faster the game will be produced. As far as developmentally wise, I'd say we are definitely on pace, for a first quarter next year, or possibly sooner. But we're definitely on pace as far as the shape of the game. We're mostly needing pre-orders. All right, looks like 50% have pre-ordered the game already. 17% no, 33% undecided. With the Comanche game coming up too, different tribe might generate more interest. The reason I started with the Navajo, let me say this in conclusion, is basically because that was what I'd done the research on. That's what I found was fascinating, but it's just not a well-known tribe. So I'm hoping that the Comanche game will generate maybe a little bit more interest in the topic. But I appreciate the results here. I thank you guys for taking the time to come out and listen tonight. That's pretty much all I have, John. So I'm ready to go back to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Joel, and Mike as well. And yes, what we're going to do now, again, if you're seeing the screen right now, just some of the banner art for Navajo Wars we have available on the GMT Games website, which you can also join the discussions about the game on the ConsimWorld forum. So what we're going to do now before we close is we're going to go ahead and take any questions that anybody has. So again, this is the section where you can go ahead and you can actually click on the hand icon in your toolbar. So if you have a question that you would like to ask of Joel or Mike, you can go ahead and just hit the hand button in the toolbar, and we'll go ahead and let you ask your questions directly to them now, or you can go ahead and type your questions and I'll go ahead and recite them for you. So I'll go ahead and start with the first question that's come in through the questions panel. And the question to you, Joel, from Dick Sauer is, you've obviously probably read a lot about this game topic, Navajo Wars. Would you have any particular book recommendation as far as a primer, a first read to prepare for play of this game?
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely recommend Blood and Thunder. That was the game that generated the interest. Let me tell you, it's very easy reading. What you'll find surprising is it's going to talk about different periods, but everything comes together at the end. So part of the book is going to focus on Kit Carson, and then it bounces over and talks about the Navajo, and then it bounces back and talks more about Kit Carson, and eventually these two groups, they dovetail and they merge at the end. It's almost like a novel the way he put it together. That's very good. The book. There's a book entitled The Book of Navajo. It's in print, easily acquired, mass market. It is anything you want to know about the Navajo is in this book, and it's a little mass market paperback format. It's written by I can't remember the guy's name, Raymond Friday, I think is the guy's name that wrote it. Raymond Friday Locke. Anyways, that's another book I would recommend if you want to read up on everything from the culture to the history. Now, the history part of that is very slanted pro-Navajo to an unfair degree in certain respects. So that's the only caveat I would provide with that. McNitt's book on the Navajo Wars is not as easily acquired. I happen to live a few blocks away from one of the best southwestern libraries in the world, so I've been fortunate to be able to just walk down there and read up on it anytime I want. But the two books I think that are most easily accessible would be the Blood and Thunder, and I can't think of the name of the guy that wrote it, but it's Hampton Sides, that's right, is the writer of that. And so that's easily acquired. If you got Kindle, it's on the Kindle as well.
Great. Another question is, are you considering doing a game on the Algonquin tribe or any tribe from the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River region? This question comes from Lucas Wan.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm open to all kinds of stuff. I've been asked about that, about some of the northwestern tribes. There's been some other people that have brought that to my attention. I don't know much about them as of this time, but I'm definitely open to any tribe. And and if there's other guys that want to design a game on that would be cool too.
Great. We have another question that asks, you mentioned some concerns during design development of the game with the length of play. Were there any other design or development hurdles that you want to mention as far as that you had to solve for Navajo Wars?
Well, the first hurdle that we had was the game that I presented first to GMT just wasn't any fun at all. It was too much simulation, not enough game. And that was the first and biggest hurdle to get past. I had developed a population model that modeled how I wanted the population to work. Early on, I decided I wanted to have the population divided into 4 age groups: children, women, men, and elders, each of which performs a critical role in the game. And how do you do that? Make it fun, not make it fiddly. And so it was getting the fun in, getting the fiddly out that was the biggest hurdle. But we were finally able to do that over the summer. Showed it to Gene Billingsley at ConsimWorld Expo this last year, and we were very close at that point. He says there's still some things that are too fiddly here, and so he gave me some really good ideas. Gene's a good designer himself. And so he gave me some good ideas, got me thinking about other ways that we could take unnecessary baggage out of the game. But I would say that was the biggest hurdle, was getting the fun in and the fiddly out. And I think that we've achieved that.
Well, great. That sounds wonderful, Joel, and thank you. I'd like to thank all our participants today for your questions. Before I close, I'd like to, we just had a question come in or perhaps a comment from Wade. Let me go ahead and read it in real time here. He said he loved the GMT's Wilderness War on the French and Indian Wars. Any thoughts on doing something like this, but really putting the focus on the Indian tribes? There were many Indian tribes, as you know, he said in parentheses. So he's a big fan of the Wilderness War game, the French and Indian Wars from GMT. Any thoughts about that? That's from Wade Hyatt.
Yeah, actually there is. I would really like to revisit that whole topic of the French and Indian War, but tell it from the Iroquois perspective. In other words, the game I'm thinking about doing that involved the Iroquois would have the Iroquois as the central player in the midst of the French and Indian War, and how do you navigate this particular crisis? Because the Iroquois were put into a very difficult position, being in a state of neutrality for much of the war, but how do you navigate this crisis with this tremendous war that's going on around you? You have other tribes that are gaining power in what you perceive to be your sphere of influence. So yeah, this is something I'm definitely open to and I'm definitely looking at.
Great, and we had the opportunity for Mark DeAugusta to get in his first question. So thank you, Mark, for your question. And Mark asked, what's your opinion of Geronimo from Avalon Hill? Mark says he liked it, but no one else in his group did. He's been looking for another game like that.
Well, I don't know of any other game like it. Basically, the game has got some great ideas, but there are some flaws in it. And I think it was pitched. I was talking to Richard Berg about this when we were in France back in October, and I asked him, because he was talking about re-releasing the game a couple of years ago. And I asked him why, and nothing had come of it yet, and he said basically there just isn't a lot of interest in the topic yet at this present time. So maybe with the publication of Navajo Wars, maybe some new interest will develop in it. But the game has a couple problems, and it basically the focus of the problem with the game, the central problem is whoever gets to play, and I'm saying generally speaking, whoever gets to play the United States Army last in the game tends to get enough points to win. And so there's got to be some way to work that out. And one of the ways that you can do that, if you have the Avalon Hill edition, is just to put in a bid system where you have to bid victory points to play the American Army on a given turn, and instead of the rules as written. If you work in some kind of a bid system, I think that would fix the central problem. And there's a lot of other fiddly things in there I think that could just simply be removed from the game as unnecessary. But that Avalon Hill days, games were more detailed in some respects than maybe they are today. But I think it's still a very good game. But there is just that one nagging issue concerning who gets to play the Americans last in the game.
Yeah, I think Mark, who asked the question, he pretty much agrees with you. I think his thoughts are mainly, his comment was he really feels execution was poor in the game, but I like how he turns the tables here, and he's pointing his finger at you and saying it's your job to fix it, Joel. I like how he's a problem solver for Avalon Hill Geronimo, so maybe there's a future in something there. So I appreciate, again, Mark, your questions today, and at this time I want to thank everybody for their questions today, this evening rather, and participating in tonight's webinar. So before I close, I want to just give the last word to Joel and Mike before we sign off.
Yeah, well, again, I appreciate you guys coming in. One last thing I probably should say, how P500 works. If you don't know how the pre-order system works, it's real easy. Once a game has gotten 500 pre-orders, you're not charged for the game until the game is just about ready to print. For example, GMT is releasing Bomber Command by Lee Berkomwood, and that is my credit card was charged last week, and they just started shipping I think today. So usually it's pretty short in between the time that your card is actually charged for the pre-order that you made months before and the time that the game actually ships. But the thing is, it really takes about 700, 750 orders to get a production slot. So right now we're past 500, so we've got a commitment that they will produce it. But the closer you get to 750 orders, the faster that production slot will be allocated to you. So, anyways, thank you guys for coming. Mike, do you have anything to say?
No, just thank everybody for showing up, and just to let everybody know that Joel's done a great job with this game. The rule book is going to be very, very good. We're working really hard on the rule book to make it an easy process to learn this game. And Joel's done a fantastic job on it so far. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the other changes that are coming about here that we're working on. So, Joel, again, thanks for having me. John, thank you.
Great. Well, listen, Joel and Mike, I want to thank you both for joining us this evening and sharing with us the work on Navajo Wars and First Nations series, and we will have this recorded and available online in within five days. And for those that were joining us today, there will be a short survey and questionnaire at the end just to help us understand how we can improve our ConsimWorld webinar series moving forward. So I want to thank again Joel and Mike and all our attendees for attending tonight, and I want to wish you a good night. Thank you very much.